language a bit, we may find that we're doing the same thing, which is great, so we can accumulate the results of our two projects. We are also doing I found a couple of things that may be curious for you, the so-called backward analysis. I guess I am the only one who is backward, but backward analysis of regulations. We want to take a regulation that is now well implemented, so we know what the good things are about that rule and what the problems are. And we want to see whether in the original impact assessment, these problems or these advantages had been at least discussed or seen. The point here is to look at whether impact assessment really creates a sort of peripheral vision, so that people really look wide enough and capture some of the things that then inevitably come back at the stage of implementation, or instead, it's the argument I think you made with Julia Hertin or Claire Dallop or Doug Kaiser again. They say it narrows down the peripheral vision, and if they see something is not because of the impact assessment, but despite, that's what you wrote, Klaus, the impact assessment. And we do that by taking an existing rule and going down back to parliamentary debates, early lawmaking, impact assessment, because we have the advantage of knowing now what the implementation problems are. And we have also, third project, 1 second only, multi-level analysis. We take an impact assessment done at the EU level, typically is related to one or even more directives. There are impact assessments related to 2 directives and 3 regulations. So apparently the Commission, once they have a good impact assessment, they use it more than once. It's good for 5 or 6 initiatives. But then these directives are implemented with specific rules, statutory instruments at the domestic level, and we want to see what happens then at the appraisal at domestic level, whether someone uses the original impact assessment or was involved, something we have touched upon in a project with Klaus called the VIA, but we didn't do much there. So we want to look at the impact assessment level of the EU, domestic, and look at regulatory regimes through the lenses of different types of appraisal in different countries and at the EU level. So the EU level is the mother, and then we have the daughter's impact assessments down there. One more thing to say is that, we have this knowledge utilization lens. We found something about the unit of analysis which is disturbing for all the institutional thinking. We found the sector. We found also that there are many ways of looking at learning in impact assessment. We said that learning can be good or bad, endarkment as well as enlightenment. And then the final thing to say is, what do we learn, us as researchers, involved in many impact assessments? And here, something I want to put on the table and discuss with you, after having discussed with John Turpenny and Andy Jordan for several weeks and emails, is how do we learn from this little, small, interesting gold mine that we have in Europe of case studies of impact assessment. Over the last 6 years, we collectively have done several case studies in which not only have we looked at the impact assessment and tools usage, but we've also done interviews on that. We have done kind of narrative reports that tell us the full story of where is the problem, where did it come from, when did you start doing the impact assessment, was the minister interested, how did you choose the tools, what was the reaction of the officers. And in some good case studies, we also went out to the NGOs, to the stakeholders, to qualified informers to say, hey, did you know there was an impact assessment? What did you do? Why did you send this memo? What are your attitudes towards consultation? So what we think is that there is this interesting gold mine of case studies that could be studied with a single analytic framework to take out, to distill, let's say, the basic important findings that we've seen across the case studies. This is very different from what the OECD does. The OECD sends a couple of reviewers and a technical officer to a country, and they do 20 interviews. It's a peer review system. It's very contingent on that year, that peer reviewer. Also what the government was to say about and authorize the OECD or not. We have seen Americans like Bob Hahn and Andrea Renda that have scored the IA reports to death. They've scored, in the case of Andrea, 483 IAs. They've compared. They got a nice data set, but when it comes, for example, to tools usage, they can only read the impact assessment and say, did this impact assessment mention benefit monetization? And they say, it's good if they do it, it's bad if they don't do it. Now, with a case study, you know exactly, if it is a good case study, why the benefits were monetized or not, you have the context, you have the narrative, you have the actors, you have the interaction. So I think there is also a case that can be made for us telling a story that is not just scoring 1 million impact assessment or sending our peer review to another country, but providing some accumulating knowledge based on the case study. And this is a springboard for what comes next with John and Andy on a possible library of case study that already exists, but it will be presented by John later in this assembly. I think I can only thank you very much for not, sorry I didn't project PowerPoint, so to look at my face for 20 minutes. Thank you so much for your attention. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Claudio. I can understand that there are questions or remarks on this very interesting talk. At least I found it very interesting, and I think it gives a lot of input for the rest of this meeting. Especially, I think many of us are used to think about knowledge utilization, but then the step what is learned from it, and that it can be good and bad, what is learned from it. Also, I liked the statement that case studies can be seen as gold mines, but how to get gold out of it, and how to optimally use the case studies for our network. If there are questions, please go ahead. Martin?
Thank you. My question is that from these case studies in the course of the 6 or 8 years of impact assessments, have you noticed an increased formalization of the procedure and perhaps an increased use of scientific knowledge or even models as we are using them or trying to improve them in this network? Could you elaborate on that perhaps?
That's a good question, because if I may take it immediately, take one by one.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a good question because it allows me and John to say that it's work that we plan to do. We have collected now case studies mostly from project carried out 2005, 2006, 2007. We don't have panel data across sectors and across years. It is possible that soon we get the case studies of the European Court of Justice. Those are 2009 case studies. And then we may be able to talk about it. Obviously, the scorecard process is one that tells you what